Okay, so welcome to the Hand Wavers Guide to Contributing to Open Source. If you thought this talk was about policy files, you want to go see Michael Hedspeth's talk. Thank you for coming to this talk. Those of you who know ChefConf history know that in the past, Disney gives great talks and they're never ever recorded. So the worst thing ever to do was to be the talk scheduled opposite Disney, because nobody would come to your talk because they knew they could watch it online. And so Michael Hedspeth and I are actually good friends. I really want to see his talk, and then we saw the schedule, and it's bad. But it's okay, so thank you for coming to this talk. I'm really excited about giving it. So, who am I? So, my name is Matt Stratton. That much you know from the program. I work at Chef. I am a customer architect, which means I design customers. I've been at Chef for about 3 years. I've been a member of the Chef community for many years longer than that. I am the creator and co-host of a podcast called Arrested DevOps, and if you would like stickers, I have them. I am one of the core organizers of DevOps Days, and I also started DevOps Days Chicago, which our CFP is open if you'd like to come speak at our DevOps Days. If you'd like to come to it, Chicago is a wonderful place. It's in September, and that is my license plate. So, yeah, actually, yeah, I'm kind of a dork. And you can find me on Twitter at Matt Stratton. It's at the bottom of all of my slides, so please engage with my brand. So, oh, can I turn this? Is that going to break anything?
He says as he turns it.
I know. I should have checked first. Okay. So who is this talk for? This is the part when I say who it's for, and you go, well, that's not me, and you try to sneak out, and I go, ha ha, I caught you, right? So, enterprise architects, solution architects, customer architects. Do you see a pattern here, right? What this really kind of boils down to is thinking about folks who work in an organization and we're not elbow deep in code every day, right? We're trying to design solutions, whether for our customers that are internal or external, for our parts of the organization. And we've got a lot of really smart people working either for us or alongside us who know how to like kind of dig in, and they know what a constructor is, and they know why a slice is different than an array. Look, I'm throwing those words out like I know what they mean. I know the second one a little bit. And the trick is, we need to understand these things because we need to understand their capabilities. And we also need to know when to call bullshit, right? Because sometimes someone will say, well, that thing won't do that. And you want to be able to totally be like, it super will. Or someone might say, that will do that. And you want to be able to say, it super won't, right? Or this is how we can design this correctly. So the idea is, this is the kind of thing. So if you actually were able to, if you're able to sit there and go, well, the way that you put that question, Matt, about slices versus arrays was incorrect, then you probably should get out of the room. You are probably not the right person. So, right? So here's the thing. In this role, and this is a role I'm in today, I'm a customer architect, which means I help existing Chef customers design their solutions. I move forward. Previously, I was a solution architect. And I actually did spend most of my career working for a living as a system administrator. So I've not always been a professional hand waver. That's only been in the last few years that I've done a lot of hand waving. But even then, when I was running tech ops for an e-commerce company, it's a lot of times we can feel really fraudulent with some of these technologies, right? We're trying to understand them, we're trying to design around them, and we can feel fake, like Joey trying to be hip here, right? And that's the thing, we want to be able to feel genuine. We don't need to be able to sit down and write a whole bunch of libraries, but we need to be able to understand what libraries can do so that we can help say, hey, when I'm constructing and putting these pieces together, is this the right piece? So the idea here is to get everybody to pull the knit cap off their head and take off that New York Knicks jersey and say, we are big grown-ups. We're not trying to be kids, but we're going to try to understand some stuff. So the other thing, too, is this talk is about how do we contribute to open source. And so that's sort of my theory here, is that there's a couple different ways we can stop being Joey. And one of those ways is we can read a lot of white papers. We can have a lot of solution architects come and give us a lot of cool demos. We can have a lot of salespeople come and tell us all the things that things can do. We can come to ChefConf and we can go see a lot of awesome talks. So the reason I'm saying that is these are not all bad things to do, right? But I firmly believe that contributing to open source is a way that will really help you understand what these things can do and where those capabilities can happen. And also, when we think about the type of DevOps transformations that we're wanting to do in our organizations, I firmly believe that embracing open source culture, and I'm going to explain what that means in a second, is really, really important for how the work goes. So what I tell a lot of my clients, in fact, I should say all of my customers, if you're a customer of mine, you're probably behind a big old firewall, and you are probably an old school enterprise. And you are adopting open source technologies. You're totally into that. Like, we got to that. That was cool. People are like, sweet, I could actually use Linux. I can use some open source stuff. You super aren't contributing back. That's a whole different conversation. But you don't run your internal projects like an open source project. And I have found with a lot of my customers as we work that you can, even if your project behind your firewall is totally closed source and is only your thing and it will never see the light of the internet, treating it like an open source project, because guess what? The open source community has solved these problems. How many people have been to like DevOps talks where we're like, hey, the manufacturing industry solved all these problems 40 years ago. We should do what they do, right? Guess what? Open source has solved collaborative development, so we should do what they do. So what this does, in addition to this being a great way for you to flex your muscles, to kind of safely dabble with these technologies, it helps you also really understand how to engage in an open source model, which you can bring to your organization inside the behind the firewall open source, which I will think of a clever word for that by the end of this talk, and it will be like a buzzword. Okay, so the question is, now I want to learn about a thing, right? So I'm going to do this by creating. So why bother contributing to an existing project than just saying, well, I super want to learn Rust, so I should just write an app, right? I should just go write a habitat plan to do a thing. That'll, right? Well, there's a couple reasons. Why? Well, first, you don't really know what you're doing, okay? So you're sitting there with a big old blank piece of paper. You don't know what you're doing. The first step of this journey is to realize that you don't know jack about this thing. That's why you want to learn it. Secondly, in that scenario, you are working alone. You are sitting there with your laptop at home, or maybe you're doing it at in your cube, and you're like, all I got here is a screen and a keyboard and a whole lot of Google. I have no pals. That sucks. Chances are you're going to follow some major anti-patterns, because the thing about anti-patterns, they're sexy. They just, maybe they're not sexy. They're big like planets, and they have huge gravitational pulls that suck people towards them. That's the only excuse I can think of for the fact that so many of us follow them. So you're going to follow these major anti-patterns because you don't even know they're anti-patterns. And you know what? You're really clever, so you're going to invent your own anti-patterns even, right? So we're kind of sitting here saying we don't know what we're doing as our first problem. So starting with a blank sheet of paper when you don't know what you're doing is just going to be massively frustrating. You're working totally alone, so all you have is some books and the internet to try to solve your problem for you, to try to help you figure out if you have a problem. You will have problems that you don't even know you're having a problem because it's an anti-pattern, and then you're going to create some new problems of your own. So I'm going to give you a small example from my own history about why you contribute rather than start fresh. And this is the, these are two different GitHub repos. So this is one under my own for a command line application I was writing called DevOps Days. And then the other is the Delivery Sugar Cookbook that's used by Chef Automate. That's not confusing at all, by the way. So here is the thing. So a little while ago, I decided I wanted to learn Go. And the level of irony that happens here is the reason I wanted to learn Go is I actually wanted to help out and contribute to an open source project that I really like that's written in Go. But I was super intimidated to do that because I'm like, I super don't know Go. I know how to like write Go templates. So I was like, I'm going to learn Go, and then I'll be good enough to go and help out this Hugo project and help them do stuff. So I was like, I'm going to do this. So what I did is I had this command line application I was writing, which at the time was called Probably Fine. It is now called DevOps Days. But it was to be used to manage, a very small, simple use case of managing configuration files for DevOps Days events as new events come up. And I was about halfway done with it, written it in Ruby, decided to change to Go, because nobody does that, right? Nobody changes languages halfway through a project. So I decided to do that, and I'm going to go re-implement everything I've already done in Go. And the problem there that I had is, first of all, working alone, There's one other human on the whole planet who actually gives a crap about what I'm doing, and she writes everything in Bash. So she's super not useful to help. And what I was doing was an atypical use case for Go. It's not something Go doesn't do well, but if you go, I'm so glad that that's not the language we use all the time. You think chef is hard to Google for, by the way? Ops code chef, Golang. There, now you learned something. I don't know what I don't know, do they Rustlang? Is that how you find Rust stuff? Anyway, so the problem is I go and I buy a bunch of books, and they're really awesome books about, like, Go and practice, getting started, and they're all about writing services and all the typical things you do with Go. The typical use case for Go is not command line application that manipulates files. That's called Perl. But so I'm still not done with this stupid thing, right? And I've been thrashing on it. And the good thing is it doesn't have to be done. Have I learned Go? Yeah, I've actually learned a bunch of stuff, and I feel like I could contribute. Had I been contributing to an existing project, I would have learned pretty much as I know, and probably a lot faster. And I bet I've stepped in some giant mud pies that I don't even know about, right? So now let's go contra-wise, right? So I had an itch I wanted to scratch. We have this thing in Chef Delivery where workflow, automate, whatever, where you can run test kitchen, right? So you want to do that in your pipeline. That's a super important thing to be able to do. And what was already in the build cookbook, and the sugar cookbook was the library basically only supported EC2. Because it was like, hey, that's, it was kind of, I don't want to call it a proof of concept thing, but it was like minimum viable, right? Does EC2. I got a customer, it's like, that's cool, but we totally use Azure. And I was like, well, I wonder how hard it would be to extend this thing to use Azure. And so I looked at it, and like, I've written cookbooks before, I've written custom resources before, but I never really wrote sugar libraries for delivery, for workflow before. So I was like, okay, so I didn't really know the thing. So I was learning that thing. And it was super easy to do. I went in there, it was a pattern. I learned some stuff, I added some value, but I had a maintainer that was able to help me because they understood what I was doing. And I was kind of going down that path. And then, so that got released pretty quickly because it was kind of decent. And I learned stuff. Learned enough that then when I said, well, now I have another itch I want to scratch, which here's another custom resource I really wish was in Delivery Sugar, that there's nothing like it. I can super do that now because I crawl, walk, run, as I like to say, right? I started with something small that was a pattern that was already there. I leveled up some skill. So what I'm kind of getting at is as you're doing these things where you're like, say, okay, I'm helping my team design how we're going to do chef in my organization. Does that mean you have to be able to write deep Ruby libraries and understand how that works for every single thing you might ever do? No, but you probably should know how to do one, right? Because then you're like, I sort of see how that is, and I can realize that's super duper hard and a ton of work. So if you say you want to do that thing, maybe we don't, right? So anyway, so the point is, I have super done this. So I'm saying don't call this an agenda, right? Let's call this right now a roadmap, because we're all architects. We like roadmaps. I'm just going to talk about some of the things we'll be going through. So first, we're going to kind of talk about determining when to contribute, right? Like when is the place to get that in? Again, going to reiterate and talk more about the don't go it alone thing. And there's no Zelda jokes because my whole talk is with friends gifts, just so you know. What not to contribute, and all contributions are probably good, but there's some specific types of contributions that are very relevant to this idea that I'm talking about. How to work with maintainers, not containers. Sorry, I got confused. We're talking about DevOps. I assumed we had to include containers somehow in this. So these are the high-level things we're gonna talk about here. So where do I start, right? Again, this blank sheet of paper scenario. You're like, I super want to learn this thing. I don't even know where to begin, right? So we're going to give you some ideas of how you can start to dive in and figure out where to go and help these things out. So first is solve someone else's problem, right? So for some project, something that's relevant, right? So again, depends on what you want to do. I may make a lot of references to how you're going to do this with Chef, but Chef, I'm going to kind of go a little bit out on a limb and say that probably most of you that are here are like, I kind of know enough about the chef part that I don't have to really go learn how to write a cookbook. And maybe you do, and if you do, that's cool. But let's think maybe Habitat, for example, right? So you might look and say I want to learn how to like there's a habitat package for this thing, and so I'm going to try to make that thing better. So first thing I'm going to go do is I'm going to go look at the issues on that repo and see if there's something busted that A, makes sense to me to fix, like I think it's worth fixing, and B, seems reasonable that I could do, right? Like not some big like rewrite the whole thing and go, which first of all someone would probably close, that's probably close won't fix anyway, but sometimes you'll see issues that are really big and complex. Sometimes you'll see issues filed that you're like, I think that's actually dumb. Like I don't care about that. And the reason why it's important, I'll tell you why it's important for it to be reasonable for you to do is you don't want to, you super don't want to give up, because you're going to give up. You're going to want to give up. This is going to suck. We'll just start with that. You're learning a new thing. It's going to be super fun at first, and it's going to suck in the middle, and it's going to be awesome at the end. So if it's something that is too big for you, you're going to get frustrated and give up, okay? The other thing is, if it's something you don't really care about, when you get frustrated, you're going to super give up, because you're going to be like, I don't even want to spend time on this thing. This is like, I had a brief, for a hot second, I made movies, short independent films, you know, and what I learned, I've talked to people who, and this is the advice that people give screenwriters, they give aspiring directors, that the movie that you want to make, you have to love that thing, because you're going to live with it for so long, and there's going to be times it's going to be so bad that you're going to have this love in your heart for that thing that will get you through the bad times. Issues aren't quite that bad, but you have to at least a little bit believe in it. So look through the issues and say, yeah, boy, that person's right. That does kind of suck. Wouldn't it be great if that was fixed? And I think I might be able to puzzle that out. I don't have any idea how I do it, but it doesn't sound like it's very big. We're architects. We're good at waving our hands at estimations and doing small, big, large t-shirts or whatever, right? So that's one thing. The other one is scratch your own itch, right? Like this was my scenario. There was no ticket in Delivery Sugar until I created it to say make this work with Azure. But in this case, it was an itch for a customer, but it was a thing that I already cared about. I wanted this to happen. So, you know, people say, you know, it's like be the change you want to see in the world, right? You want something better in this project? Make the thing, right? So, and the best thing ever as a maintainer is to see somebody fix their own thing, right? Like the worst thing as a maintainer is just see an issue get opened and be like, this is totally broken, no repro steps. You're like, guess what? Issue is never going to get fixed. But what maintainers super love is a pull request, which is like, here's a fix. And depending on the project, sometimes it's like they want you to open an issue first and you can tie it to it. But the thing is, solving your own problem, because you know, and think about from a product perspective. Like, so we're talking about open source projects, but let's think about how many people here have been working with Chef, the company, in one way or another for more than a year? Have been dealing with us for more than a year, okay. So, sorry, I love Chef Software Inc. But one of the things that we've gotten so much better at recently is thinking about things like products instead of just purely as engineering. So for a long time, we built stuff that we wanted to build. And then, not even that, oh, we just want to do that, but as in the things that made sense to us. Well, guess what? We are a small subset of the humans on this planet who operate the computers that run the universe, right? So what smart product people, like our product people, do now is they talk to the customers, we understand what to build. So the same thing is true there. The maintainer of this project, you may have an idea for a thing that it never even occurred to them or anybody else. So if you have an itch, you scratch your own itch, right? Now again, there's no hard and fast rules around should you open an issue. I don't even care. We're going to talk about how you figure that out later. But I will assure you, trying to fix a limitation you see in a project rather than dashing an issue off into the bug tracker, you will see much faster traction doing this yourself, and you're going to learn a lot. So again, don't just go make your own thing, right? I'm going to talk about this a little more why. I mean, you heard my story about why I didn't just go make my own thing. So why this really matters is you don't want to have this in isolation. Trying to make this your own thing, you're out on a raft, floating by yourself, and ain't nobody there to help you make it better. You take something out there that already exists and make it better, and you will learn 100 times more and 100 times faster, and it will be exactly that number, and I have the data to back it up. It's on a thumb drive I forgot to bring with me to Austin. So, but you just trust me, it's there. right? So see how the hands wave, right? So again, being alone sucks. What not to contribute. So how many people have either heard a talk or read an article or listened to a podcast or were like, hey, people who want to get into open source, here's some tips for you. How many people have like seen a thing like that before? Okay. One of the things people always say is, help with the docs, update the FAQ, groom tickets. First of all, by no means am I saying those are not good things to do. And you should totally do them. And that is a good way to help understand a project. It is not a good way to start to understand a project for the very specific concept we're talking about in this talk today, right? That will give you some basic understanding. A lot of times when we suggest to people to do that, it's how you can gather some, for lack of a better word, a little bit of street cred in that community maybe. People will get used to seeing your name on commits. If you don't know anything about the project, it's a way to kind of learn about it. The thing is, if you came to this talk, you're probably looking for things to go a little faster and a little bit deeper, right? So I'd much rather say do a small change that maybe scratches a tiny little bit of an itch, but you actually wrote some code, than invest a whole lot of time writing documentation, because we didn't grow up to get architect in our title to write docs, let me tell you, right? So these things are updating an FAQ doesn't as much help you understand the limitations or potentialities of a project as it will to actually, for the way that we're trying to do it in our design. So I want you to keep that in mind. Now, working with maintainers, and this is the part where when I say we do certain things, like we want to start to say, how do we take the way we do things in the open source world and bring them behind the firewall? Learning how to do this, which is the skill you will develop, will help you understand why it's good and maybe where it's painful, and help figure out how to apply that to your organization. So here's a couple things to think about when working with maintainers. Follow the contributing guidelines. All good projects have guidelines for how to contribute. Sometimes they're very complex. Sometimes they're like, just test it somehow. That would be awesome, please, right? But a good project should not have a blank README. There should at least somewhere be some minimal viable contributing guideline. So make sure you read those. Make sure you dig, and just be like, well, you didn't call it contributing.MD, so I had no idea. Maybe they call it guidelines.MD. Take half a second, figure out where they are. Most projects have some type of framework for how to contribute, what they're looking to require. Guess what you should do in your internal projects? Do that, right? That will help people help you. Make your changes, and we're going to dig into each of these, by the way. This is my mini roadmap within the roadmap. If I was agile, I would say that was an epic, and this is something non-epic, I don't remember, story. Anyway, make your changes small and understandable. We're going to talk about that. Test your stuff, and don't take it personally. We're going to talk about this one a lot. Super important. So let's begin. Follow contributing guidelines. Okay? Like we said, maybe it's common practice. People like to create a file called contributing.md if they're complicated. Sometimes they'll just put it in the README. You know, here's an example of what I think, ironically, no, this isn't their contributing.md, but this is some of the contributing stuff for the Hugo project, which is that project that I still have yet to help with because I totally don't think I know Go well enough. But they tell you things like, here's our code contribution guidelines. So stuff like, what we want you to do is, hey, fork this thing. That's how you do it, right? We want PRs, because not every project works that way. Almost everyone you work with on GitHub is going to follow that model, but they're saying that. Sometimes they'll specifically say, we want you to name your branch this, or make sure that you don't fork it to master on your own fork, or whatever. And then they say, well, you're going to do a PR. You know, hey, they have a contributor license agreement. Nothing more annoying as a maintainer than I tell you to do this, and then you submit the PR and you didn't sign the CLA, and we're like, oh, geez, really? You just didn't even do your paperwork, right? Which you're like, that's super annoying. The maintainer's like, I super need it for whatever reason, and you have now blocked yourself. They say you need to add these test cases, you know, and they say, and then they even have some really specific stuff like run go format. They're like, just do these things, right? So like if it's a cookbook, we might say we want you to like, you know, use some syntax highlighting tool to do the indents pretty, or we really are, you know, pedantic about indents, so use spaces, not tabs. That might be in there, and you might just have to deal, right? They ask you, this is one, is they very specifically want you to squash your commits. This is the kind of thing that will differ from project to project. So the more respectful you are to the contributing guidelines, the more likely you are to get your PRs accepted, because you don't want your PR rejected because of paperwork. You want it rejected. Well, you don't want it rejected at all, but if it's going to be rejected, I want it rejected because it was a wrong decision or it was crap code, not because I didn't follow the process, right? Because maintainers, for the most part, have this stuff in place for good reasons. We're all, at a certain level in our organizations, we know that maybe 50% of the process that our organization has is bullshit, but at least half of it is legit, and there's reasons, and people should do it, right? That's true of the contributing stuff, right? And again, they say, make sure your check succeeds. So in this case, we're going to talk about this when we talk about testing. They actually have a testing framework where they're like, when you commit your PR, it's going to super do a thing, and don't try to contribute failing code. It sounds funny that you have to sometimes tell people that, but you do, right? So make your changes small and understandable. So don't make too many changes at once. And what's really, really funny is that in our real world jobs, we super get this, right? We know how to break work down into manageable chunks, and we do work in progress, and we do Kanban and all this stuff, and then we're going to go contribute to something open source, and we will shove up a PR with 75 commits that changes 25 things, and then be like, why? What's wrong with that, right? So same idea. Think back and say, if I'm a change that I'm making, it should be small. It should change one thing. It doesn't mean do a PR for every line of code you do, but it should be one functional unit of a thing. It should be understandable, right? Remember, thinking about this, the people who are approving this or reviewing it, they need to understand the quote-unquote business case. They understand why you're making this change, not just, again, the more work you do. Think about this. I've always said when I would go to my boss and I want my boss to make a decision, anything I ask my boss to decide on that requires them to do work is very likely to be a no. Anything where they just have to think for a second and can say yes or no, it'll be a yes. So if I go and say, hey, boss, I want to do this, and by the way, for you to figure out if the answer is yes or no, you have to do a bunch of research, and by the way, read this doc I gave you and do all this stuff, you're just going to go, you know what, Matt? Nah. But if I say, hey, blah, 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 and here's why it is, and it's all here, and now you've just absorbed it in 30 seconds, you're going to go, you still may say no, but you're not going to say no because I gave you more work to do. Life lesson, you want someone to say yes to you, never give them more work to do. Nobody wants to do more work, right? So Jez Humble has said before that version control is nothing but a communication tool among developers. That is super important, right? I will tell you, projects I manage or they maintain, the worst thing in the world is the pull request with no body, right? PR comes in, I'm like, what does this thing do? Why do you care? And there are edge cases, right? I'm sorry, okay, a PR that says change home button from forest green to hunter green. Probably an okay PR, right? But if you're doing anything, tell me about it and tell me why I care, because chances are, otherwise I'm going to hit you with won't fix, right? So, and again, like I said, in our real world jobs, we would go rage at people that try this with our stuff. So tell me why you're doing it. I can guarantee you it won't get merged unless I understand why. So if you get ahead of the question, because here's the thing, you give me that blank one, I'm going to reply, I'm going to tag it do not merge, so that nobody else accidentally does, and I'm going to go and say, can you tell me what this does? I'm going to ask you a whole bunch of questions. And if you could answer those questions in advance, then it'll get merged faster. So let's think about that, right? Communication. The best thing we have, best communication tool, better than Slack. Slack is great. GitHub is better for talking about a change we're trying to make. Example 2, bad change, right? PR 341 fixes some stuff. And this is bad for 2 reasons. This is bad for even getting it merged, right? Because I'll be like, whatever. But here's the thing. This is bad if it's a project that nobody contributes to but me. That's a really crappy PR, because I do PR my own stuff for reasons. But remember, it's a communication tool and it's a history tool. So now I'm going to go back and I'm going to figure out, well, it seems like stuff started breaking at PR 341. What was that? Oh, fixed some stuff. Great. Now let me go look into the commits, which are probably written just as crappy. In fact, there was probably one big commit that changed one file 15 different times, and who knew what happened, and it all sucks. right? But at least here, PR 341 enabled the use of TOML in addition to YAML in configuration files. At least I know what I was trying to do, right? And I can say that was a thing. And I can understand, if nothing else, even if it's my own project, that helps me remember where my headspace was when I did that thing. So communication, communication, communication. Sometimes being pedantic isn't a bad thing, right? I do this with Chef. Generally speaking, I don't care what you call a thing. I don't care the words you use for things, although I will tell people, like when you say Chef script, I'm going to yell at you because you're using the word incorrectly, which means you're thinking wrong. So the only time to be pedantic is when it helps collaboration. When it helps collaboration, most of the time being pedantic does not help collaboration, or if it helps understanding. So the point is, there's a reason we have conventions and commit messages. Good commit messages generally follow these guidelines, except when they don't, right? So if following these messages in your project, if you're deciding to come up with a standard, is going to turn into a massive bike shed that you're going to spend 3 weeks fighting about whether or not they should end in a period or not, you should decide it doesn't matter. But they generally should be initial caps. This is convention. I haven't really figured out exactly why it matters, but the world does it. You know, you have a short introductory summary. Everybody does this really well. Everyone will do this. They'll put it, and then very few people will put in a body and a commit, but it's great. But this is the other one is, and I feel strongly about this, it describes the change in an imperative manner, right? So it's not fixed this thing. Well, first of all, none of them should be fixed anything, but it shouldn't be changed this class to be this, it should be changed this to do that. And it's because of the way when you think about how Git applies things. So if I'm reading history, I change this commit if applied will. So think about every commit message should start with, in your head, this commit if applied will change the TOML to whatever, right? And then if the sentence was this commit if applied will fix typo, you know it's not good. Fix typo, by the way, I've always wanted to do a search across all the commits on GitHub and find how many have the word typo in them. Probably most of mine. Test your stuff, again. So we talked about this, and it shouldn't be like, we all know test-driven development is a thing and you should test, but the problem is testing sucks, right? That's the new one, like instead of hashtag monitoring sucks, it's hashtag testing sucks, because we're lazy and we want to do cool stuff. And the problem is a lot of times it feels like testing is more work than is necessary, especially when you're like, I just want to do a little thing, man. Why do I have to write a test? But what it boils down to is, number one, make sure you follow whatever testing guidelines are laid down for that project, because it'll just get kicked right out. So you can fight all day long that you may think, you know, RuboCop is dumb or something like that. But if the project says to be merged, you must pass RuboCop, well then do that, right? And you know what? Sometimes there aren't testing guidelines. That doesn't mean you get a free pass. Just because in my project I did not tell you how to test does not mean you get to go, woo! No tests, YOLO commit, right? Even if you do, you shall always test, even if you weren't told. All that matters is if you're told, make sure you test the way that you were told. And now share the results of your testing, because a lot of times this testing might just be exploratory. Or it might be, it's great when we've got Travis set up, or we've got something that'll automatically report the tests into the PR and all that. That's great. But if you don't get to go like, well, I totally tested it, and they know. No, they don't. The maintainer only knows if you tell them. So either the system will tell them, and if it does, sweet. Or if not, paste the results, do a screenshot, do something. Again, the more information. So add the results. Now, for the bad times, for the times when you had a super good idea that was going to change the world of this project, and that asshole maintainer closed the PR. I cannot stress this enough. First of all, as a life lesson, this is what we call rule number 6. Always remember rule number 6, don't take it personally, and you'll go far. But definitely don't take it personally when your stuff doesn't get merged. Unless it is personal and you know that for other reasons, and that's a whole different talk. But generally speaking, it's not. So, Jessie Frizzell wrote a blog a couple years ago called The Art of Closing, and she talks about, you know, being a maintainer of a very large open source project, like, I don't know, Docker, and who gets tons and tons and tons of PRs, and like the problem with being a maintainer of a very large and popular open source project is you usually are the bearer of bad news. You have to tell people no a ton. So she wrote a really good blog post for maintainers to be like, here's how not to be an asshole when you close, right? So But she says one of the hardest parts of being a maintainer is having to say no to patches you don't want. And these are a couple really insightful thoughts around it from some thought leadery people who deal with the same thing like we were just talking about, like Solomon, right? Rule number 1 of open source, no is temporary, yes is forever. So I may say no to your merge, and I may say yes to it a week from now when it makes sense. But if I say yes now, we're stuck with that shit, right? And the same thing, contributors put effort into their pet pull request, but the maintainers are dealing with the bigger picture. So that's the thing, and it actually should make a lot of sense, those from the room, right? The contributor and the maintainers, they know the vision, they have an idea. And your thing that's super special to you may conflict with that. And that should make a lot of sense to all of us architects out there that maybe they know things we don't know. So keep that in mind. So here's the thing, right? You get that won't fix, despair overtakes, or maybe anger, you go start raging at them on Twitter, none of that helps. Communication. There's nothing wrong with asking. Now, a good maintainer who's followed Jesse's example will actually tell you why, right? And they may not be verbose, but they might say, hey, this seems cool, but totally conflicts. Or come back when you've written some better tests or you've written some better code or whatever. But even if they don't, there's nothing wrong with asking why. Worst thing that'll happen, they'll ignore you. Chances are fairly good they won't call you names. Nobody's going to punch you in the face. A little bit of advice from the field. I asked people what they had learned in their fears of contributing to open source and their advice. So one was, again, and the good thing is a lot of this actually is stuff I talked about, but like Matt Ray says, be descriptive with examples of what you're fixing. Be polite. Again, maintainers probably deal with, first of all, they deal with a lot of PRs, and most people are not polite. So if you're nice to them, they'll pay more attention to you. How many people have ever worked in any kind of like ticket-based system of supporting users? How many people would have a user that was a jerk to them, and then every time the ticket came in, you're like, that is the last one I'm gonna look at. And then the people who bring you cookies at Christmas time down to the help desk, you're like, new phone comes out, it's yours, man, right? So be polite. You will be remembered for being polite. And Annie Hedgepeth says volume. The more you do, the less nervous you become. So just do it, right? I mean, don't just like flood with a bunch of crap, but find a bunch of little stuff. Reading the contributions as those things go, right? So also, here are some friends. You might be like, hey, actually this whole slide's been full of friends, but specifically, and there's a talk right after mine, the Sous Chefs, which is kind of a community managing of cookbooks, cabal, something or other. I don't really know how to talk them. They adopt a whole bunch of cookbooks, but they're always looking for people to help make things better. And you could get, and they actually, this came up at the summit, they're starting to launch a mentoring program, which would be a really good way to kind of help understand those things. Again, you might have to pick and choose and look through some of those cookbooks to get, if it's a thing you're trying to figure out how you want to get better at. And they have assured me they would love your help, because I just saw them in the speaker lounge right before now. So it's all gonna be fine, right? You can do this. You can not only learn these skills by contributing to these projects, you can actually then magically infiltrate your own organization with some of this magic open source way of managing things, because you've gotten used to working that way. That's what happens. I can tell you, someone who worked in a non-open source way for years and years and years, when I started like contributing to open source projects, it was all weird, and now I can't imagine any other way to manage a software project in terms of actually communicating about the code. Any other way does not make sense. So this isn't hard. It's not scary. Just don't be an a-hole, and you will be fine, right? I'll tell you the links. You'll be able to find it. So don't worry about remembering all these links. They'll all be clickable somewhere. But a couple things. So if you've seen the new LearnChef.io, which is this rally thing, there's a super cool module called Open Source Collaboration that has a lot of stuff like this. Emma Jane Hogman-Westby, who has a lot of names, and I tease her about it. Getforteams.com is a really good resource. A bunch of other tools about writing good commit messages, and Chef's own Nell Shamel Harrington has a talk called Open Source Governance 101 that just got published yesterday, like on the YouTubes. So there, ArrestedDevOps.com is my podcast. I put all my talks on my GitHub repo. This one is up there. I'm on Twitter at Matt Stratton. Sometimes I remember to put stuff on SpeakerDeck. So we have time for a couple questions, I think. Yeah? No? Maybe? Okay.
How can I encourage people to contribute to my repository, for example? Like, what can I do to make it like people come and contribute?
So one of the things is sort of first go through kind of make sure that it's contribution ready, right? In terms of if I go see a repo that has no README or a very blank README, and there's no contributing file, there's no explanation, there's no testing framework in place, it makes me super, and it's not because I'm being judgy of it, I'm actually kind of scared to contribute to it because I don't know how to do it in a way that will make you happy, right? Like I'm gonna be like, but how will I do that? So first of all, make sure that that's there. And are you thinking about inside your organization or like a general, like public open source kind of thing? Like how do you advertise for it, right? I mean, do you have a lot of people using your tool? No one's actually helping is what it boils down to. Well, one of the things to do, and this is where the fine line is as a maintainer, is not be a jerk, right? Like you probably get a bunch of issues, because that's the problem, right? If you're like me with some of my code, like the issues stack up, the PRs do not. So there's kind of a running joke that the term PRs welcome is the way of saying like, go jump off a bridge. But in a nicer way, you could say, hey, that's a really good idea, you know, and sometimes you can flag with help wanted. But I do think that the more that you make your repository contributor friendly so that it's really easy to get started, right? Like, and sometimes there's stuff that we think is table stakes where we're like, well, of course somebody knows how to initialize a Go project. Well, you just do blah, blah, blah. But you look at some of them, they will actually say like, do X, Y, Z. This is how to build your local environment to develop for my project. That will help. That won't attract people, but it will certainly not detract them. Beyond that, it's sort of a matter of trying to figure out, and again, for different projects I've had, it depends upon the community related to the project, right? Like that's, if there's a way to kind of share with that. So that's, and then beyond that, it's marketing, and then you go talk to my wife who does marketing, and she'll charge you a whole bunch of money to teach you how to like advertise and buy Google ads for contributors to your repo, I guess.
All right, please join me in thanking Matt.
Thanks, everybody.